Thank you so much. If we can have one more round, warm round of applause. So we started getting a little bit into Subbu's talking, about private blockchains. So let's get a little deeper understanding of what solution might be best for your business, or if you haven't heard of a consortium model. So right now we're going to bring up our next panel, which we're really excited about. So the moderator is going to be Miss Anna Melton from Decentralized Ventures, who's wearing a few different hats today. She's again joining us from the Middle East, from Abu Dhabi. She's been an advisor in the space for more than 3 years and is the founder of Crypto House New York. And then we're so happy with us today that we have representation from EOS, Mr. Sam Noble. He's with the EOS Dublin team. They have so many incredible projects going on right now, you can't even keep up. I think they raised, was it 50 million in the ICO? EOS? 4 billion. Oh, wow, way off, 4 billion, okay. And then we have Mr. Gokul Alex with PwC. He's a fantastic, really interesting mind working with some of these engineers at MIT with and our sponsor Algorand. If you haven't heard of the Algorand and the algorithm that they're working with for their pure proof model, it's really a brain bender, so maybe he can explain it to you if you have a few minutes. But some of the brightest minds right now at MIT, Gokul is working with, and he was one of our mentors for the hackathon the last few days, so we were so grateful for having him there to mentor some of our young entrepreneurs here in Bangalore. And then next we have Mr. Ravi Chandrasekhar with WePro. Sorry, I think I butchered your name, although I tried to get a I tried to get a tutorial beforehand. And then finally we have Mr. Siddhartha Bahadur with IBM. Thank you so much for joining us here today. So this panel will also have a Q&A session, so I know everybody's kind of chomping at the bit to be able to ask some questions. So thank you so much, and Anna, take it away.
Thank you. Hello, everyone again. Literally delighted with this fantastic panel. I know there's going to clear up any misinformation that you might have read online. Obviously, there's a lot. We were saying there's a huge raft of stuff out there about public-private blockchains. There's champions of all the different types of models. So I'm sure you're going to get clarification today on that. Happy to say we'll be able to do 20 minutes, then 10 minutes Q&A, then dive back in for another 10. So we've got a nice amount of time, more than we thought, which is going to be awesome. So, as we know, it is a hot topic in the space. There are staunch people for and against the various ones. In a nutshell, please would the panel explain the properties of public and private blockchains? And I'm going to pick on two of you. So first of all, I'm going to pick on Sam to go on the public blockchain, just the basics.
Okay, so to begin with, I think it's very important when we're talking about labels like public, private, and consortium, we have to be clear with what we mean by each of these. So we'll give some definitions, but also some context. So for me, when we're talking about public, private, or consortium, we're actually talking about the deployment of a specific blockchain technology. So I'm not talking about a specific blockchain. So with example, EOS could be deployed as a public or a private or a consortium-based blockchain. So whenever I'm talking about this, I'm talking about how we've deployed it in that context. So Vitalik, he coined these kind of this taxonomy, these three buckets quite some years ago, 4 years ago, which in blockchain time is a millennium ago. So I think we kind of need to revisit it, but for the sake of this conversation, we'll stick with that. So what is a public blockchain? Well, in effect, it's a blockchain that's open to everybody to read from and to write to. So as a user, I can execute a transaction on Bitcoin, on Ethereum, on EOS, and this makes it a public blockchain. Secondly, I can also take part in the validation or the running of this blockchain. So with Bitcoin, I can be a miner. With Ethereum, I can be a miner. With EOS, I can be a block producer. Now, there's certain barriers to entries here. So with Bitcoin, a proof of work-based blockchain, you need to have the raw computing power to be able to compete. So whilst it's open to everyone, it is kind of limited in a certain aspect. Similar with EOS, anybody can register as a block producer, but you need the backing of the community through votes to propel you to a position where you can actually take part in that consensus mechanism of the top 21.
Nice to hear the history from Sam. It's a very relevant question today when we talk about the way by which we can classify blockchains. I would like to look at the public, private, and consortium blockchains as three governance models. So when you look at the evolution of this technology, if you look at the history, when cyberpunks thought about decentralized networks, right, they evidently wanted to integrate cryptography with decentralized identity. So when you separate your data structure and cryptography with the identity, and when your identity becomes less relevant, you move into the paradigm of private blockchains. Consortium blockchain is a construct in between, where you have a commercial angle to a kind of blockchain. So I consider public blockchain as the blockchain where there is decentralization is always a continuum. It is not a finality that you. That's why even I believe Bitcoin is designed around a probabilistic finality, not an immediate finality. Even Vitalik talks about different kind of decentralization, vertical, horizontal, hierarchical, different decentralization exist. So when you are open to emergent properties of decentralization in a blockchain, that has to be public. But when you are not anticipating emergent properties, when you want to have upper boundaries for a blockchain, then you go for private blockchain. When technically we look at it, the fault tolerance and resilience of private blockchains are based on the certificate authorities, the kind of security that we bring in for Byzantine fault tolerance. So what you are limiting the possibilities of the protocol when you're looking for private blockchain, where you are more than cryptography, you trust more on certain other properties of enterprise or of the network, right? So you are trying to look at entire, if you want to, there are two ways you can look at. You want either go for probabilistic approach or a deterministic approach to a network.
Shall we move on to Ravi? I think you're stealing something.
Sure.
Fantastic answer. Ravi, do you want to take on
Yeah,
more on
yeah.
the private?
So I'll mostly cover private today for the conversation per se, right? For me, all the three, it has its own purpose, and when you have a selection of your, either business or a venture, how you want to make it, it goes through a process of understanding what the business use case you need accordingly. For me, I would put much effort on consortium, because it could be a private consortium or a publicly you are coming out with marketplace components with incentivization and so on and so forth. So prominently your centric is on business use case. That's my take.
Thank you. Siddharth,
Yeah.
and last but
Yeah.
not least.
Yeah. So my take is that if you see, the main difference between the two is that public is a permissionless blockchain and private is a permissioned blockchain. That's a fundamental difference at the most basic level. And public blockchains like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Stellar, which is a little lesser known, but yeah, it's also a public blockchain. Those are the examples. And then you have got private blockchains, which could be for a select group of entities who want to transact within a certain select network. Now, in a sense, you can draw an analogy to a public cloud and a private cloud in a sense. But I would say the main issue here is that what is the purpose intended, and both have their strengths and their use cases. And I would say that a trend like Bitcoin, which is on the cryptocurrency side, is a very fascinating trend. We have to see how it plays out. Maybe in the next 1 or 2 years, we'll have more clarity as to which way it is headed. Private blockchains definitely have a very strong business perspective. to a particular sector or industry, especially in finance sector or insurance sector. It has a very strong play. And quite simply, some people may want to proceed with an extra level of caution, given that you have quantum computing on the horizon, and people are talking about post-quantum cryptography and how quantum can crack any kind of encryption and so on. So in that sense, the people who are being extremely cautious may look more at the private blockchain, but ultimately it might be a best of both or hybrid kind of an approach, which is also incidentally happening in the cloud business, at least from what IBM is seeing in the market. So that's my perspective on it.
Fantastic, and I know we've obviously touched a little bit on the next question. This is going out to anyone in any particular order. What do you feel are the main benefits, the main disadvantages to public-private consortium, and any other caveats rather that you'd like to throw in? Go.
So, okay, I'll start. Again, for me, it's all about how you deploy a specific technology. So when we're comparing public-private or consortium, consensus-based, we're really talking about how we're using that. And there, it's just like if you have a toolbox, you'll have different hammers in there, you'll use the right hammer for the right job. If you're trying to use a sledgehammer to hammer in a small nail, it's not going to be very effective. So most technologies you can deploy in different approaches. So another example with EOS, the mainnet is public. We take that same technology and deploy it privately. So we run projects where we have private networks. Then we also have consensus-based or consortium-based, where we have appointed node operators, but it's read access to everybody. So the advantages and disadvantages, it's more suited to each business case. You have to select the right deployment model for what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. So I'd like to take it more from a point of view of the business use case rather than just the technology. Of course, we talk a lot about technology in the blockchain space, but the consortium approach essentially is I would say quite an interesting one, which is emerging. And the strongest reason why it is being favored by certain parties in the blockchain space is that there's an element of competition in anything that enterprises do. For example, again, taking an example of finance or insurance sector, most banks have their own offerings to the market and their own products which they're promoting, and they're obviously competing with each other. But there is also something like Swift, for example, which many of the banks are using. Now, if you come to the blockchain side of things, again, every bank could take the approach that I will build my own private blockchain, and I will try to onboard my customers onto that. I will try to do my customers KYC on that, and so on and so forth. But that's too much of effort. In order to do that, you need to have, the first thing you need to have is a blockchain solution architect. And that's a skill which is not very easy to find in the market right now. Because a blockchain solution architect is somebody who has the full business perspective and understands the technology at depth. And then you need to have your own team to set up the entire, so a better approach is where a set of banks, for example, or insurance firms, for example, get together and take the consensus mechanism of a consortium approach, where they leverage certain common use cases which are of benefit to everybody, and then see how it plays out, rather than have a huge entry barrier of how do I get started, how do I recruit my team, where do I get the skills from, and so on and so forth. So I would say the business angle to it is very important. In some of the initiatives which have happened in the industry, the technology has been very strong, but some fundamental failures in business logic have happened. Like if you take one strong industry player who's built a private blockchain, for example, and you expect other competitors of that industry player to come on board, that's not going to happen. The technology may be very sound, but there's a conflict of interest. Why would a competitor want to come on that? So this is just one example that, why the consortium approach is getting a little popular.
Yeah, I would like to double click what you said. In specific, for example, I would take a running example today. The KYC registering agencies, particularly in India, they are moving into a consortium style where both financial services companies as well as banks, specifically in the area of like KYC, anti-money laundering, AML, in the governance standpoint, they are coming out. They're testing and coming out with the set of business use case where they put a network so that banks and financial institutions, even non-banking financial services industry also come into the play, so that all are in the same. They can they can contribute and reap the benefit as well. So this is a main aspect, one of the aspect of consortium model.
So when I look at a consortium model, I have seen certain examples where it takes time to build a consortium business model. For example, when we take IBM TradeLens or VTrade, I'm just talking about an enterprise blockchain rollout. So where it takes some time to onboard, even after you form a consortium, it takes some time to onboard the players into it. And when you look at some other industries, where if we spoke about Swift competing with Ripple, or R3 Coda and Swift coming together against Ripple. So in some industries, the formation of consortiums would be quite easy. But in some other industries, when there are fragmentations in business model, formation of consortiums will be a challenge. Now, coming to a public blockchain scenario, or I would like to say, now we have Algorand in the air, or prior to that, when we looked at public blockchains, we have Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, where technology has been the primary narrative. And then when we look at a public blockchain, the dominant narrative would be around interoperability, and then sometimes around security. But when you look at a consortium blockchain, the discussions are more towards the business model, and many a times the discussions about interoperability or security are getting sidelined. So these are practical scenarios, I believe. So what we will need is, we need a team, like Siddhartha pointed out. We will need a really good solution architect who understand security point of view, business architecture point of view, and integration architecture. Because many a times in the consortium blockchains, integration with legacy systems are ignored in the initial stages, and that becomes a roadblock in the long time. But in a public blockchain, all these concerns come together even the initial level. So if we have a very good solution architect in the consortium approach, they would be having a vision of across all these areas. Otherwise, the consortium approach will hit roadblocks on the process.
Awesome. I think we've all got some inspiration for a career path. Certainly, I think there's a lot of need. So take notes. Thank you so much. Like, fantastic answers. I'm sure we've got a lot more to cover. Obviously, Sam touched on like using the right tools for the job. Why did your particular business, projects, platforms choose the model that they have done, or like what are you looking into deploying if you haven't already, and why? Just to give some clarification over the thought process you went through to arrive where you have, stumbling blocks that you found, whatever you think is relevant.
I'll let someone else go first.
Okay, sure. So I mean, the experience of IBM in this space, at least, I mean, of course, we do have one of the forays into the public blockchain, which is called WorldWire. WorldWire, which runs on the Stellar blockchain, which is a public blockchain. And then we are also, working with a few consortiums. So namely, in this part of the world, we have a consortium called BankChain, which is a consortium of some 37 top banks across India and Middle East. And that started in February of 2017. And that's been a kind of fascinating journey, I would say, because there's been a lot of learning within that consortium. And some of the points, like what Gokul also pointed out, you do need a very strong blockchain solution architect. The chain coding part is still relatively easier. You can still get people who know Java or C++, you can get them trained within 3 to 4 weeks. You can get them trained onto how to do chain coding. That's not a big deal from a technology point of view. But the blockchain solution architect is the real superhero that pulls all this thing together. And in a consortium like that, there have been a lot of, for example, hackathons, blackathons, and a lot of learning has happened over this time. About a dozen odd use cases have been tried. And I mean, hopefully that will lead to something, very tangible very soon. And there are some, there's in fact, a launch of a, dedicated blockchain data center which is going to happen on 10th July, which is probably the world's first of its kind, and it's happening in India. And the bank chain consortium members are all, keenly watching this, because it's kind of a situation where they want to see how it succeeds or how it goes forward, because everyone has seen Bitcoin. I mean, it's a successful public blockchain. People have seen private blockchains. The consortium approach is the one which, for the large enterprises and business, is the one which people are watching very closely to see how it goes, say 2019, 2020 and forward.
Yeah, so I sound on this specifically on private blockchain and consortium. The area we work with more on enterprises, the large, capital enterprises, and also we work with the consortium like B3I in the insurance, and Mobi in automotive space, large. And we are very focused towards a specific industry like consumer, and then energy utility, which goes to production soon. Particularly, they cover the end reaching to the customer standpoint. So I think our focus is towards in that space, and we have built our own solution at the in that space, in energy grid and relative area. Yeah, so our focus in that space.
When I speak about my specific role in PwC, I would say my priority work is with governments and public sector. So when we work with government use cases, in certain domains, government is looking for initially rolling out, initial rollout would be within departmental rollout, and then gradually moving into interdepartmental organization rollout. So, and later on, they would be presenting it to the citizens. So, at the moment, we can say a lot of government use cases are around private blockchains. But having said that, when we work with international organizations, like worldwide international NGOs and organizations, there is a huge acceptance for public blockchains and hybrid blockchains, I would say. So that's very interesting landscape where when we have to reach out to people who are unbanked, when we look at financial inclusion, or when you look at refugees, or when you look at people who are deprived of identity. So in those cases, an enterprise blockchain or a private blockchain doesn't make sense at all. So in those cases, we can see that the global mandate is for public blockchains, but probably we will see that our nation states will gradually embrace public blockchains when there is better realization of the pros and cons of public blockchains. And at the same time, I do believe there should be more dialogue between public blockchain, like foundations, be it Ethereum Foundation or Algorand Foundation. There should be more broad-based dialogues between governments, corporates, and public blockchain organizations. And of course, like initiatives like what we are seeing in Hyperledger, or what we are seeing in R3 Corda. We are seeing a lot more dialogues happening. I believe this will not be a technology-centric dialogue. Essentially, blockchain is an institution-building technology. It's not a fintech or a regtech, or it's not insurtech. It is essentially an institution-building technology. So, we will need more convergence, and so there are various routes to decentralization, but everything will lead to decentralization. So when that happens, I do believe this thin firewalls or thick walls between enterprise, public, private, hybrid, consortium blockchains will never exist.
That's exciting to hear.
Thank you.
Sam, have you got anything else to add on the points?
Yeah, hello? Yeah. So we have examples of different projects that we've been involved in using the same technology, but running in each of these different contexts. So a good example of public is where we're working with a large organization of restaurants to do gift certificates. So you receive a gift certificate that is put online into a smart contract and stored where you can query that publicly. This was in response to Toys R Us, a large toy manufacturer in the UK, going bust some years ago, and millions of pounds worth of gift vouchers being wiped out. So by storing that on chain and decentralizing that in a publicly verifiable way, there we have a public application. In a private application, some ideas we've been looking at there, if we're looking at auditing within an enterprise setting, so let's say that you have every action that takes place in a financial institution, you need an audit record of that so you can go back for security and due diligence purposes. Now, traditionally that's been handled in databases, which is very centralized, and it can be tampered with. By running a private blockchain that the rest of the world don't need access to, internally you can make sure that you have consistency within your audit logs. And then going lastly onto the consortium model, we're launching a new chain at the end of this month called Europe Chain, which is providing GDPR compliant, in terms of compliance and regulation, blockchain services to enterprises inside and outside of Europe. So it's completely run by European actors. Now here it's a consortium model because the network itself is operated, the block producers themselves are vetted, they're brought on chain, they're appointed, it's not open to everybody, but the network itself can be used and interacted with by everybody. So this is where we have the mix of all three.
Fantastic, thanks. A huge amount to digest, I'm sure. We're going to throw it out to Q&A now, so we don't miss the opportunity to get your fantastic questions. I can imagine there's a few. Enjoy.
Okay, so if anyone has a question for any of the panelists, ideally we start with related to public and private blockchains, and then we can perhaps move on. But please stand up, introduce yourself briefly, and then if we can keep our questions brief so we can get to as many as we can. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Gurkirat Singh, and I'm here from Punjab. And what my question is that, firstly, Sam, I really appreciate your work. And I'm sorry my question is not directly linked to private and public. What I'm going to ask is that we have that trilemma that Vitalik said with the blockchains, that we cannot achieve scalability, decentralization, and security, all three at one same time. And what I think that EOS tried to do is that we compromised with decentralization to a bit to achieve scalability. I think you agree with that. But my concern is we are hitting 4,000 TPS at this moment. That is the maximum that we have achieved. But at this moment, the network is still not mass adopted. And we have already compromised with the decentralization to an extent that it cannot be centralized further than this point. We cannot have less block producers than 21. That will be way more centralized. So as we have more adoption of the network, as we have more traffic and more transactions coming in, how do you plan to scale this network further? That 4,000 transactions will not be enough in a coming decade. So we have to hit more than that. So how do you plan to scale this network further?
So yeah, you're right. It's a little off topic, and we can get into the details more after. And I'm happy to talk to anybody about this. In terms of scalability, so 1.8 that's being released soon. It's RC2 right now. That's introducing a new virtual machine, which is going to increase the efficiency by around 60%. 4,000 TPS is on the main network in private testnets and in other chains that we've been operating, which aren't out publicly yet. We've been hitting 10, 15,000 TPS. Just by making some small adjustments to the networking code. So in terms of centralization versus decentralization is incredibly difficult. It's a learning process. We have to start centralized to become decentralized. I think Dan Larimer and the Block One team did a really good job of making this compromise in the beginning and then handing it over to everybody else. But again, when we came out last year, it was the first governed, the first permissioned, and the fastest blockchain. So we set that benchmark, and now we're just trying to expand from there. So don't worry, it is coming, and we can talk more about efficiency after.
Thank you so much, Sam. Another question?
We see governments and we see a lot of private organizations spending a huge amount of money on private blockchains. I want to know if, many panelists have been working in this area. What is the one or at least I have not heard of any. So I'm actually looking for one successful example where a private blockchain has given far higher benefits than the cost, and not something that you are doing, but actually something that is ready and in use. If anyone has any answer.
So I think your question includes what public and private blockchains, I mean, done by governments and private sector all together, right? When you look at benefits, right, it is not like the benefit that we see from Bitcoin or Ethereum. That's not the intended benefit from government rollouts or private sector rollouts. For example, when a particular state in US or a particular state in India or a particular consortium is doing a private blockchain, their benefits may not be immediately reaching the consumers or the citizens. For example, one of the most pioneering work on enterprise blockchains in the financial sector has been by Bank of Santander and BBVA, and what Swift has done. Swift has done a payment and reconciliation engine on blockchain, and they have did it in conjunction with Australian New Zealand Bank and a couple of other leading banks. They have achieved a tremendous result in what they wanted to achieve. Essentially, that was a limited consortium in which they could prove that if there is a particular message code being transmitted by the Swift ledger, and how immediately they can do the synchronization, and how immediately all the banks which are part of the ledger get immediately they can verify. So in terms of their benefit, they have achieved what they wanted to achieve. Likewise, Bank of Santander and BBVA, what they have done in 2015-16 period, they could do a cross-border payment. Likewise, DTCC has done a pioneering work along with NASDAQ. DTCC is a depositories clearing organization based in Canada. They could do a very pioneering work using Hyperledger. Okay, so, and likewise when you look at some of the country rollouts, like what Sweden has done, or what United Kingdom has done, or what Ghana has done, every blockchain implementation has a lesson for their stakeholders. So when we are looking from far and criticizing them, you may not see the benefit as like a public benefit. For example, we perceive the success of Ethereum, EOS, Bitcoin, because they are reaching to the public fast. But in terms of the technology feasibility and viability, or the business use case viability, what they wanted to achieve, they must have achieved it. So we can't be summarily rejecting it. Yeah, you can. We can.
Using a Oracle database or something of that sort.
Yes.
So my question is there a net benefit of a private blockchain that has been adopted? And I mean, we can talk of something, you guys have actually implemented in various places.
Yeah.
Have you really seen an organization
That's
coming up with the courage and saying that, yes, this is a great benefit that we
if you
receive?
understand technically, a centralized database like Oracle is no way, please let me complete, okay?
Sure.
It is not same as a private blockchain. There are so many novelties. For example, if you look at a sawtooth-based implementation, a private blockchain, right? It brings so many features: trusted execution environment, hardware enclave, POET simulator. Or when you look at other private blockchain implementation, it could be on EOS or it could be on any other ledger. There are so many features of cryptography that you can do even in a private blockchain. None of the databases, you forget about Oracle. I am telling you about GridDB, AtlasDB, or Titan, or Graph databases. None of them provide this feature. So one-to-one, apple-to-apple comparison between a database, be it any database, and a blockchain, be it any blockchain, is totally doing injustice to this technology. Please understand the technology in depth. The database technology is, if you understand CAP theorem, you can clearly understand there is a difference between CP systems and AP system. Blockchains are not designed to be CP system. Blockchains, be it private or public, is designed to be AP model system. So a comparison between private blockchain and database is highly ideological and highly prejudiced. Even in any of the rollouts, you will have benefits if you have a really good solution architect. You can involve good cryptography, you can involve good multi-party computation, you can do trusted execution environment, hardware enclave. Lot of things can be done in private blockchains, which you cannot do with a centralized database. So there are people doing it. If you look at guard time, the best example is what guard time has done and what guard time continues to do. Guard time has built a very beautiful system involving their specific something called Black Lantern architecture, on the top of which they use Hyperledger, on the top of which they use Ethereum, on the top of which they use Bitcoin, right? They use entire stack, and this particular solution can be implemented either in a public rollout or a private rollout. This cannot be replicated by any databases. So please, my request is please don't demean the work done by thousands, if not more than that, thousands of people worldwide in blockchain technology, be it private or public. That's definitely not been done by anyone in the database space for last 30 years. That's my comment.
Okay.
I'd like to just quickly add on this. So there is one example I can give you of a successful example on private. IBM has recently done an initiative for the telecom companies, like Airtel or Idea Vodafone, to block the what you call the pesky calls, the unwanted calls. And in that use case, there was clearly a win seen, wherein there is a cost saving for these telecom companies, and also for the end customer, there's a benefit that you're filtering out the pesky calls. So that was done using the Hyperledger fabric. But having said that, what I would say is that at least in the near future, blockchain's real value will be for B2B rather than B2C. Initially, it will be B2B. Of course, ultimately, it will also be B2C. And the reason I say that is that in the B2B context, like I gave the example of one of the consortiums, such as a bank chain consortium, once the businesses can see the benefit and value of working collaboratively on a common platform, then it will very easily go on to the consumer space as well. And to give a very extreme example, for example, recently our country went through a 6-week-long voting exercise. Using a technology like blockchain, for example, theoretically, it is possible to start voting at 9 a.m. in the morning and complete voting at 12 noon that same day using your smartphone. It is possible. Theoretically, it is possible. So that is the potential of this technology. Now, obviously, people want to see certain clear success and proof points before taking a plunge. Many organizations do want to wait and watch before they see a successful example, and hopefully we'll see that soon. But my feel is that, at least from an IBM perspective, that B2B is more likely to succeed before you get to the B2C.
I would like to add.
Are we able to move over to just? I'm just really aware there's going to be a couple more people that I'm sure we could talk about this all afternoon, probably for the rest of the week, and maybe we can catch up on it like later on. We've got the rest of the day. That would be awesome. I'm just really cognizant that there's a couple of people like with their hands up that would really like to ask a couple of questions. If we can keep it as brief as possible. I know it's a huge topic.
We can take about 1 or 2 more questions max. So, but it's amazing to see the energy behind all of these questions. So I promised this gentleman here.
Hi, I'm Ravi from Aqualis. We are a company primarily doing enterprise solutions in blockchain, nothing but blockchain, based in Chennai. My question is regarding consortium, selling of consortium solution, blockchain solution. In both the examples, GDPR example in Europe and also the banking ecosystem in India and Middle East, right? Suppose I am who starts this dialogue, and who is this sold to? Is it started by consortium members themselves? How do IT players like IBM and Aqualis, for example, come into the picture? Because we hold the technology, we know how to solve the problem, but they have the problem, but we don't have a particular person like a single enterprise to fund it or to sell to. In our case, to sell to, right? How do we do that?
So the consortium approach is usually not started by the technology players, at least that's what we have observed. It is started by some people in the industry itself. There's a need felt within that industry where some of these large enterprises came together and started a discussion, and they felt this is an approach to take. And then there was an entity or a partner organization which got them together on the same platform and set up some rules of engagement and structure and gradually involved in the technology players, for example, IBM, as an infrastructure partner. So that's how it normally evolves. It is best done that way. It may not be very optimal if a technology firm tries to start a consortium in a particular industry. It is best led by the industry player who involves in the technology players. That way, the conflict of interest is minimized, and also it gets the confidence of the whole sector. And only then the technology can really play a part in that. So that's.
Fantastic. We have time for one more question, and then we'll let the panel wrap.
Hi, this is Suresh from Trustworks Chennai. My question is more from the governance point of view. So the governance for the public, private, and the consortium models, they would be different. And so far, I have not seen a clear governance model which has been established, or that can be like a Bible which can be followed by everyone. So is there any progress or work that's happening in this space?
So I can speak from EOS, where I guess we can say this was a kind of a grand failed experiment, where one of the USPs when we launched last year was that we had a governed blockchain. So we started off with the EOS Core Arbitration Forum, or ECAF, which by default was opt-in. So here, if you had a dispute with something that happened on-chain, you were able to raise a case, and there would be a core arbitration forum. Somebody would be appointed to you in your locality who would help you through this process. What we saw there was that pretty much 90% of all the cases that we had were people who had lost their account keys, or lost their private keys, or they'd been hacked. So the basic governance there was really just helping people who'd lost the passwords for their accounts, which didn't really work at all. And this gave rise to a whole new argument or conversation where if it's governed by default, if as soon as you create an EOS account, you automatically subscribe to this core arbitration forum, maybe I don't want that. Somebody else could impersonate me by showing they had the ERC20 keys for the Genesis account, and now they've stolen my keys there. So we started off with what we thought would work. As with most things, you put it out there, you test it, it doesn't work at all. So we kind of withdrew all of that, shut down ECAF, and now we're looking at how we can actually do this in a usable way, because we're learning with everybody.
So when we look at governance models, I would say we are in the very early stage of having a Bible for governance model, because we are seeing what's happening in Bitcoin, Ethereum. There has been some serious forks, right, hard forks, and then even when something like Tezos came forward, initially there were some conflicts between the founders, but now Tezos is progressing very pragmatically in terms of their technology itself as a self-amending ledger. And we can see other governance models in Hashgraph, and so what we can see is right now we are seeing different governance models. Maybe initially off-chain governance would still be the best governance model, and then once the community evolves, once the technology matures, we can see more on-chain governance models. Same would be the case with even enterprise or private blockchains. It would be too early to go with an on-chain governance model in the inception. We'll have to see the dynamics, like Sam said, conflict of interest. It is quite natural, right? We are bringing together diverse stakeholders to trust. So trust doesn't, how can you trust in cryptography in one single day? It takes time. So we have to see the spectrum evolving. That's my point.
Hi, we're going to have to wrap up the answers to that question, guys. I'm really sorry. I'd like to leave everyone with some key takeaways. I'm sure you've got absolutely loads, and I'm sure the lovely panel won't mind being asked later on today. Key takeaways for how a team could decide which is the best model for their toolkit. Maybe like a couple of points each. We'll just go rapid fire because we're over time.
So I'd say it's just the same as how do you choose a programming language to build your next website. You kind of look at the options available and you pick whichever has the best options and the best fit for you. There's no one size that fits all.
Yeah, I agree to what Sam said. I believe you should have a trust pattern, like you should evolve. This is where what Vitalik and others are now talking about experience design. So that really matters. We have to look at your stakeholder. You have to understand what kind of a trust pattern exists in this particular industry. So you have to be very cognizant about it. So this is high time we evolve trust patterns and trust models, and based on which there could be a standard or specification. We are really looking forward to such kind of a collaboration between players. So at the moment, we take this decision very contextual, looking at the trust dynamics, trust deficit, and the need for decentralization. That's how we take a decision. It's not like Sam said, it's never one size fit all.
Yeah, so quick and easy. We have a models to select the process, business use case process, and the technology. That's a flow as usual. So you can select based on the specific industry needs. Either it could be verticalized or horizontal solution like identity management across. I think we have industries kind of getting matured in selecting process against technology and how you want to implement in a consortium model or a private, or you want to do private, then you can move to monetization part. That's leave it to the individual who wants to proceed in that space. That's my take.
Okay, I'd like to give a very specific example here and also to address the governance question which keeps coming up. There is a tool called Regulatory Sandbox, which more than a dozen countries have already adopted. And in fact, even in India, the Reserve Bank of India has made some preliminary announcement around a regulatory sandbox for fintech. So how does a regulatory sandbox work? It is a limited duration, say a few months, where in that limited duration and within that specific context, players are invited who can do some real world transactions and prove the efficacy of that solution. It could be blockchain, it could be something else, but it works very well. This kind of approach works very well for blockchain solutions. And it's a very simple way to tackle the governance issue, where in a permission blockchain, for example, you can make one of the nodes as a supervisory node. So the regulator, like the banking regulator in this case, for example, RBI, or it could be SEBI or IRDA in insurance, for example, or whichever regulator in other countries, you could set up a regulatory node or supervisory node, and in a sense that has a bird's eye view of what all is happening in that permission blockchain. And that regulatory sandbox is a very well-governed mechanism of allowing some emerging technologies to prove their worth in a fair setting where it's a level playing field. And then the governments can take a decision that yes, this is an approach which was successful, for example, in fintech sector, and it can be taken forward. And the approach increasingly is that people want to break the monopoly of intermediaries, even if they are government-backed intermediaries. They don't want even government-backed intermediaries to have a monopoly over, for example, the payments space or certain other sectors. So
thank you so much. I'm going to have to cut you off, and again, we could literally go on for absolutely ages with this. Thank you so much to our fantastic, hugely knowledgeable panelists. Thank you for your questions, and that's it for this one.
Thanks, Anna.